This looks like a PlayStation. It uses PlayStation memory cards and controllers. It plays PlayStation games along with games from every other retro console you can imagine, but it's not made by Sony. It costs $200, and even though I love it, it might not be for you. Let's talk about why. This is the SuperStation One by Retro Remake, which is a company founded by Taki Udon, a YouTuber turned hardware manufacturer who has made a bunch of great things, but I feel like this is the magnum opus. This is a beautiful device. It's modeled after the PS1, not the number, but like PS1 model of the PlayStation 1. If you look at them side by side, they look pretty similar. Even the box is going after this like kind of, retro PS1 vibe. I love the box. It's a nice box. Now, I mentioned this thing can play basically every retro console you can imagine. That kind of caps out at the PS1, though. Everything before the PS1, this thing plays basically like a dream. But if you're looking to play like GameCube, PS2, anything in that realm or above, this is not going to be the console for you. So why would you buy this for $200 instead of an Android handheld or something that could run all of those consoles and then some for around the same price or probably cheaper? The answer comes down to this is a hardware emulator instead of a software emulator. Now, I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of the differences between hardware and software emulation. There are a lot of great YouTube videos that you can go find. I'll link to at least one or two of them here and in the description. The short version is this. Software emulation is using code to mimic old hardware on a modern device. A hardware emulator like this is literally reconfiguring the circuit board on here to behave exactly like the consoles used to play growing up. For years and years and years, there was a pretty big disparity between how accurate software emulation was, and hardware emulation was like obviously the way to go if you wanted accuracy. But software emulation has really caught up, man. I mean, all of the things that this thing can run, your phone can probably run basically perfectly. But there are a lot of benefits to having a hardware emulator in a package like the SuperStation One. For example, look at all these ports, dude. Just on the front, you have 2 memory card slots and 2 PS1 controller slots. You have a USB port for a controller coming out of the front, along with your SD card slot for all of your games. On the side, you got some component cable. You got some component cables. On the other side, you got composite cables and CON and S-video. Then on the back, you have USB-C for power, 2 more USB slots, an HDMI out, DIN 10 VGA audio, and Ethernet. No matter which screen you want to plug this thing into, it's already there. The port's already there for you. If any of this sounds familiar to you, you've probably heard of Analogue before. Analogue is a company that specializes in making hardware emulation devices, specifically emulating specific consoles. Most recently, they had the Analogue 3D, which is built for playing N64 games. They had the Analogue Super NT for Super Nintendo, the SG for Sega Genesis. The device most people know Analogue for is the Analogue Pocket, which is basically purpose-built for Game Boy and Game Boy Advance and Game Boy Color, although there are some adapters for some other things in there. Those are the 3 that it's basically built for. That one kind of blew up, like, out of containment. A lot of people who don't know what an FPGA is or that there's a difference between hardware and software emulation bought that thing because it's a cool-looking Game Boy, man. I get it. I'm always this close to buying one, and then I don't do it. And I'm honestly glad that I haven't done it. The thing about Analogue is that I would consider them to be like the Apple of hardware emulation. Their stuff is very expensive. It's very premium feeling and looking. It's very beautiful, and it's sometimes very difficult to get. But regardless of your feelings about Analogue, I think the high-level thing to know about them is that all of their devices are, again, purpose-built for like one specific console. I'm going to say roughly 20 to 30 consoles are playable on this thing. I keep losing my little component door. Whoops. That's not going to happen to you on an Analogue console, I would bet. But the Analogue 3D is $270 at the time of making this video, and it only plays N64 games. The idea that this can play way, way, way more than that for less is really exciting. But besides just the price, one of the big differences between what Analogue is going for and what Retro Remake is going for with this is that the Analogue really does feel like a consumer device. Like if you have a bunch of N64 games lying around, you could just buy the Analogue 3D, plug them into the top, and they'll play basically perfectly. And that's kind of a trade-off I think a lot of people are willing to make. The SuperStation One requires tinkering. It requires popping this micro SD card out and putting it in your computer and putting it back in here over and over again and moving files back and forth and kind of finagling with stuff until you can get it to work. And again, that's not going to be for everybody. I am not a person who ever really had any interest in hardware emulation or FPGA or buying a MiSTer device, if you know what that is. I am basically the Analogue consumer buying the SuperStation One instead. So as a complete outsider to this space, how has it been treating me? The answer is good, but it took a lot of work to get there. I've been testing the SuperStation One for just about a month at this point, and when I first got my hands on it, There was no starting guide, there was no setup or anything. Because the SuperStation One is based off of an open source project called the Mister, I was able to do a lot of research and find a lot of the answers I was looking for because people have documented these things over the years. But at this point, if you were to buy one of these things, Taki Udon has made a 45-minute setup video that should guide you through the process of getting everything up and running. But again, it's 45 minutes. Comparing this against an analog device, you're not going to need 45 minutes to set up your analog 3D. Once you get everything up and running, though, it just works in the way you want it to, but it does mean you still have to continue using this like old school archaic front end and operating system every single time you want to do everything. I think it's one of the things you should know up front, because when you buy this thing and turn it on for the first time, it's not going to have like a PS1 aesthetic to it. It's going to look more like an Atari 800 when you turn it on. And every time you turn it on, it's going to look like an Atari 800. I consider myself to be a person who's pretty comfortable tinkering. I will set aside an entire day on a weekend or a weeknight or something to just mess around in all the emulator handhelds and consoles that I have. But even this took a little bit of trial and error to like get to the point where I was very comfortable turning it on and playing whatever I wanted on it. That said, though, Retro Remake has shown off a new operating system that is apparently going to launch at some point. I don't know when, but at some point that looks really nice. It looks really nice. I think when this launches, if you can buy the SuperStation One and it comes preloaded with this OS, it'll probably shave off most of the rougher edges that I've had to deal with in my month of testing. But let me tell you, once I got over all those humps, once I got into a place where I was just like playing games and capturing footage of games, oh my god, this thing is amazing. Again, most of the stuff that the SuperStation One can do is stuff that you can also do in many other places, on many other platforms, with many other form factors. And in a lot of cases, software emulation will actually get you more bells and whistles for certain games. Things like online support, fast forwarding and rewinding, retro achievements, all of these things that have kind of become like the norm for emulation these days, a lot of that is not available via hardware emulation. And people always push back when I talk about this, but I would argue that in some ways, more limitations actually makes things more interesting and more exciting and more fun at times. Like I've been playing through Pokemon Lazarus, for example, almost exclusively on the SuperStation One, and not having fast forwarding through battles, I thought was going to be a nightmare at first, because I can't tell you the last time I played a Pokemon game without having, you know, like immediate access to save states and fast forwarding and rewinding and things like that. But I'm loving it. I'm loving the experience, but also as a seamless way of interacting with a lot of these game libraries that I never really had a chance with. The SuperStation One feels like it's kind of opening my eyes to this entire other generation of consoles that I just didn't have. And more importantly, it's allowing me to experience them the way I would have if I'd been using the original hardware. When I was growing up, I had the Sega Genesis, and then I didn't have any other video game consoles until the PS2 came out. So there are a lot of games in between those two consoles that I didn't get to experience. Chief among them is the PS1. I knew like one kid growing up who had the PS1, and I went to his house and we played Crash Team Racing like 3 times, and that was basically it. That was like my whole experience with the PS1. And now I have this thing that looks just like a PS1, and I can use an actual PS1 controller with and a PS1 memory card, and I can play all of these games that I had always heard about. And it turns out they're really good. Surprise, surprise. That's not to say I haven't played any PS1 games. I played Final Fantasy VII, all right? Like, I played that game. I played PS1. I've played some PS1 games. But I haven't played a lot of the hits. And that's what I'm trying to do now. One thing that I have to shout out, which I know some people really dislike, but I happen to love, are all the shader options. The shaders on this thing are amazing. They look so good. They have some like really basic kind of CRT shaders, but there are some really, really advanced and interesting looking ones that honestly, I think look spectacular. And if I wasn't trying to capture like totally clean footage for some of my videos, I would probably be playing most of my games with these shaders on. And I also just really have to highlight how cool it is. Again, like I went to one of my favorite retro game stores in New York City, Video Games New York, and I walked in and I walked out with a PS1 memory card and a PS1 controller complete with the PS1 logo on it. And I could just plug those in and activate them through the Atari 800 looking menu. And I could be using original peripherals on new hardware. And there's something really special about that. One weird caveat, though, is that you can't use the PS1 controller to navigate the menus of the actual hardware emulator. So that's kind of weird. But when you're in a game, it performs basically exactly as it would as if it was a normal, regular-ass PS1. It's pretty sick. I think at the core of it, the SuperStation One and basically all of these hardware emulators exist for people who really care about the experience of playing games on original hardware. That you're getting a bunch of quality of life improvements and little things that you can shift here and there to kind of perfect your experience makes it a really compelling thing for people outside of that sphere, but it's still just like a little bit too finicky and requires a little bit too much tinkering for me to recommend it to like everybody. But if you are one of those people, if you are like a hardcore retro gamer, or if you are a tinkerer, this is the best value for this kind of device that exists right now. If you wanted to buy like a comparable Mr. FPGA setup for yourself, it would cost at least twice the amount that the SuperStation One costs. And that's wild. And if you're really like me and you have a YouTube channel and you're capturing content and video, or you want to like stream these kinds of games, and you don't want like a really intense setup with like a million different consoles all plugged into an HDMI switcher or whatever, and you'd rather just compress all of that down into one device, buddy, the dream is alive. I think when that new front end that Taki Udon has been teasing eventually comes out and it starts to ship on this device, this will be the easiest, most consumer-friendly way of getting into hardware emulation for most people. It puts it at least on par with what Analogue is doing with their own stuff, and then also drops the price dramatically while adding an unbelievable amount of features. I think Analogue has the edge right now because of that plug-and-play nature, but you're still locking yourself down to like 1 or 2 consoles at a time. I think the expandability of the SuperStation One, when it has that software, will probably make it the most accessible, best, and cheapest way of playing all of your favorite retro games for a relatively normal price. And speaking of your retro games, there is an adapter called the Super Dock that you can buy that plugs right into the bottom of this thing that does have a disk drive on it and will also allow you to use even more original peripherals from other consoles that are not just the PlayStation. I did not buy one of those. I do regret not buying one of those. I probably should have, especially for this video, but in general, it just seems sick. I would love to go buy original PS1 games and be using them with this thing, but maybe one day. To go all the way back to the beginning, I pre-ordered this thing like a year and a half ago. I kind of forgot I ordered it until it showed up at my door, and I've been basically obsessed with it ever since. Except for the fact that my component door just kind of flew off while I was making this video, and also the fact that the power button doesn't seem to work all the time. It's really finicky. I love this thing, and I'd recommend one, especially if you made it to the end of this video. I said at the beginning of this video, it might not be for you. If you made it to the end of this video, this thing is probably for you, if we're being honest with one another. Thank you so much for watching this. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Do all the things that YouTubers are always asking you to do. If you want to support this project, you can go to patreon.com/wavelengths. I have a bunch of videos that I'm always making that are coming out over there, along with my initial impressions of the SuperStation One when I first got it. You can go watch that video over there as well. That's going to be it. I'll see you later, everybody. Bye-bye.